I am so glad to announce our next speaker, who is also a writer, but just, more of a poetical sort than an, STEM anthology sort. And so excited to have her as a guest. Let's welcome Kim Denning.
We have a clicker, right?
We did. What did I do with that clicker?
All right. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I don't know if this will reach all the way back there, so if it doesn't, just say next slide and I got you.
All right, cool. You know what? Can we do that instead? Okay, let's do that instead. Thank you. Because I'm so glad that we're allowed to swear in here because I am nervous as fuck. And I am going to sort of read, like I need my cheat sheet here. And so because of that, like having this in my hand and handling a clicker, like I just knew it would be disaster. I would need a spotter for when I fell off the stage. So we don't want that to happen. So thank you very much for what is your name, by the way? Jacob. Jacob. Awesome. I don't have to say, hey, you. Click the fucking side. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Jacob. Okay. All right. So a little bit about me. So I have been featured in print and digital anthologies, and I was nominated. This makes me really happy to say that I was nominated for a Pushcart Prize last year because I'm like, kind of like Matt. Like I don't come from a STEM background like you all, but which makes me proud to be here tonight that you're accepting me in your space. But also in the poetry world, I'm a little bit of an oddball because I don't have that MFA like you do, Matt, which is awesome. So I think it's beautiful. So I came to poetry through, I have a master's degree in American history, so I get you, I understand, yeah. So I'm a history person, I'm also a people person. And so what that means is that after teaching high school for 16 years and then teaching social studies methods and instruction to teachers during the friggin' pandemic at UT, I ended up in a position where now I am a consultant and I teach leadership development and team dynamics, and I try to help people fix their bullshit, is basically what I do. And I'm also following in a very long line of abuelas' ancestral footsteps as an apprentice currently in curanderismo. So if you don't know what that is, go look it up because it's really awesome. So I am essentially a curandera, following in my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and so on's footsteps. And my role, it's like all of us have a specific practice that we do. My grandmother was a sobadera, which is like kind of like an indigenous massage therapist. Her mother was a partera, which is a midwife. I am a shamanic practitioner, so I help people heal holistically, spiritually, and work with them alongside their medical doctors and also their psychologists, and trying to help them heal holistically. But what I said about the Pushcart Prize, that was for a poem called Borderland Suburbia. So I write poems about heartbreak more so than love. And I also write about the heartbreak of injustice quite a bit, quite often, about the place where I'm from and the places where I grew up. All right, so here we go. We dug our nails, scraping into wounds of our burlapped chest, ripping despair, filling our bladed chasms with blighted tinctures and herbs of finest ecstasies. Those are the first lines of a poem that was allegedly so painful that it won the grand prize in an anti-Valentine Day contest hosted by a really cool online zine called Versification Zine. And that was a few years ago. Versification Zine is quite a prickly publication. And I'm throwing a little shout out to them, not only because they gifted me with the whopping grand prize of a $25 cash award, which in poetry terms is a lot, y'all. Like, it's a lot. Like, it means, woo, I get to buy the more expensive bottle of Malbec today. And I did. It was delicious, $16.99. Yes, exactly. It was truly, with no irony, a fantastic award, like, for real. To have won the respect of editors who get my verse, it was simply amazing. And I know I speak for a whole lot of other poets out there when I say that respect is everything, because we definitely do not do it for the money. We might do it for love, and we definitely do it for angst. And for justice, like I said, many of us do it for justice. But these days, in our modern world where we try to be cooler than cool, there's this weird bias about the love poem. And when we describe writing poetry as being something we do for love, for angst, it comes across as adolescent to a whole lot of people. But when I say that, I want you to know that I don't mean with regard to justice, because to me, that is never adolescent. And I think to most people out there, it's not adolescent. But that love thing, it invokes memories of, like, you know, that first poem that you wrote when you were like in middle school and you were just so in love with that one person. You know what I mean? But that's not what I'm talking about today. I've also heard people talk about poetry in general as being not just adolescent, but also pretentious. Some of you may have that opinion as well. And if you do, then I'm so glad that you're here tonight, because I'm hoping to convince you that it's something else. But there is some truth in these people's criticisms. But I'm not here to engage with those criticisms tonight, because I'm here to talk about the grown-up sort of poem. And by that, I don't mean only written by grown-ups, because there are some very good young poets out there who are writing and speaking fire all over the place. They're incredible. So that's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm not talking about age. I'm talking about a poem that sounds like it's been through some things. Like, this poem has been through some shit, and it is here to share with you and make you feel things. I'm talking about how the best love poems are the ones that sound like the words themselves have experienced the devastation of heartbreak, the crush of that first or second or even a third or a 10th love, the depth of grief. This love poem sounds more like a poem of despair, the kind that lives its life in a minor key, D minor if we're lucky. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm a really big fan of D minor. Take, for example, Pablo Neruda's Nobel Prize winning collection of Heartful Madness, the one titled 20 Love Poems in a Song of Despair, which I will call Exhibit A. Those 20 love poems begin with descriptions of love existing in a state of perfection, one that we humans are constantly in search of. It's what we yearn for. It's this thing that we want in total desperation. But it turns out that the title of the book is a trick, because Neruda was being cheeky, playing with our emotions, because in this book, infatuation takes a turn, and the love of our yearning begins to break into reality. It leads us down into the depths, into a song of despair. And although it's not in this book, I think that his sonnet number 17 serves as the ultimate example. So now I give you Exhibit B. I do not love you as if you were a salt rose or topaz, or the arrow of carnations the fire shoots off. I love you as certain dark things are to be loved, in secret between the shadow and the soul. Thank you. Thank you, Jacob. So it's in that space between shadow and soul that I'm talking about tonight. That space that hides and lurks and winds its way, snaking within our consciousness, where we understand that we cannot fully appreciate love without also knowing heartbreak or grief or longing. We understand that without the angst of despair, there can be no love. We can deny this truth all we want, until the moments when this dichotomy emerges as conscious choices within our lives. And for that, I give you Exhibit C. On a night or day, hours after you'd left, I rolled over onto the pillow that you'd slept on, and it still smelled like you. Tu perfume, of hard work and sorrows. It did a thing in my brain, that scent of you, shooting jolts into my chest, tilting my earth, threatening to blaze. A feeling I gave no words. It frightened and surprised with seductive fascination, demanding reserve and keeping under guard, telling no one, not even you, because I suspected, believed, wondered, was afraid that I wanted you more than you wanted me. In my heart, mi corazón of bruises and mourning, it was an instance of decision, the kind of detrimental choice where soul is thrust down bigger and further paths, any of which might or might not kill it with regret. One, to rip off the linens, the pillowcases, the sheets, the everything, throw them into the laundry pile, shoving deep where you'd fade into the confusion of sweat and life. Or the other, to ignite the flames, a pyre from which I'd never emerge. To bury my face into your smell, inhaling you and the peace of those moments of coming to rest in the middle of the night or an early dawn, wrapped in you, feeling dangerously safe with you, whispering truths and revolutions, sinking into your skin from toes to forehead. Silence was the safety, keeping to myself, the shade of you, the rush hoarded selfishly in my pain, thinking it was respecting yours, never wanting you to know that quietly, alone, decidí a quemar. So one of the things that frustrates and drives my craft is the lack of words that we have in the English language to describe the immense depth of the joy of love and all its complexities and layers. We just simply do not have enough words. Take it from me. I know. I'm the poet. I try to find the words. Thesaurus.com, no help. There's just not enough words to describe it. And so maybe one reason I rely on the stories of despair is because there are simply more words and more metaphors to use. And we have to wonder why that is. I don't really know because I'm not a linguist. Like, I like history, but I'm not a linguist. I mean, it could just be that I'm a Gen Xer who grew up listening to very good but really sad music. But I do know something about intentional word usage, the conjuring of feeling, the spell casting of vulnerability. The thing about writing poetry, at least for me, is that sometimes the words that pop and spew out of my consciousness are words that I'm compelled to write down and turn into verse. They just have to be written down. And sometimes they are words associated with happiness and joy. I mean, I can write what sounds like a pop song in major key. It's not as cool as D minor, but it's there. I might even use conventional methods like rhyming schemes or alliteration, but as long as that poem is specifically about love or justice or finding one's strength, there's probably a darker tone lurking under the verse. One that pays respect to the trials, the growth, the hard lessons, and the pains of life. Or like this one, that plays with rhythm while speaking of loss. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Jacob. So I bring you Exhibit D, a tumbao. Inside hollows of timbales, she knows. She knows all her places, hips, arms, legs, hands, swaying, striking, stepping, a tumbao. Breathing rhythm underneath a don't fall in love tilt of preciosa chin. From abate of fingertips, down arch of arm, swirl of skirt, and long-legged twirl, she spins, breathless. Swings of horn and pulse of flow, conjures cast into unfurling. Drowning, pray and watch, but too timely, too bold, too much lure in her whirl. His rising gaze asking the questions he's too timid to know. As she sways away in the snare of congas and crush of crowd across floor we're now gone, she'll step into the time of another's beat that frees her soul and lifts her shine. So see, rhythm and rhyme can be fun. And sometimes when writing, what we yield is the opposite, a situation of unrequited love, whose poem is comprised of words that are dark and foreboding. They stand strong as if wearing an armor, wrapping themselves around beauty and light, hiding joy away, shoving it deep under the surface until all the reader can experience is the longing for a thing that never came to be. And so sated is Exhibit E. We dug our nails, scraping into wounds of our burlap chest, dripping despair, filling our bladed chasms with blighted tinctures and herbs of finest ecstasies. Then we ate each other's hearts in lustful, craven pieces, choking on poisoned arrows, sorrows, building walls out of rejected maybes, leaving emptiness satiated and wanton in its eternal, poisoned afterglow. This one is a poem of ache, but it is also so very deeply one of love. It's the kind of love that exists inside the space between words and feelings, that place that I described, that Neruda described, that place between want and existence. And I said that I would tell you how this transcends time, so here we go. This is how it transcends time. For me, there's more that exists within that space, and that is the love of my ancestors. The love and guidance that's been handed down through generations of survival and creation. The dichotomy of love and despair is one that my Maya and Mexica ancestors knew very well. They didn't fear death. They knew that death was something we need to experience every single day in order to grow and become better humans. They knew that every day we must put to death the things we have to release, the things that do not serve us. They knew that we have to do this. We have to dig into what we call our shadow selves and unearth the things that drag us down in order to experience real love and joy with the freedom to be who we are and to live fully in the spirit of community. For generations, that dichotomy of love and despair has been a story dominated by colonialism. Colonialism and assimilation have changed us for the better and for the worse, both. And for me, I cannot help but feel like my gift of storytelling is how they would want me to lend voice to this tension. It's the tension I felt on a very profound level when I first realized that I could see faces of my familia in the statue of Xochipilli, the Aztec trickster god of flowers and merriment. He guards and leads the souls of warriors, who my ancestors believed will rise again one day in the form of hummingbirds. And that up there, sorry, go back, Jacob, right there. So that is my great-grandfather, and that is my grandmother. And while we mourn the death of our cultura, we seek love in a way that heals, and it lifts us out of the pain. And here I give you Exhibit F. Xochipilli in stone, my great-grandfather in silvered emotion. Soul of defiance, snatched by photo in downturned mouth. Eyes seeking eternity, cheekbones reaching sky, welcoming, posturing. Come, gringo, take my land. Your progress yields crops that burn in our vessels of clay. I entice you with festivals and flowered halos, enrapturing you in intoxicating bindings, sunned skin, tongue of gods, vines imbued with provocation, and the unconquerable sangre fria. Warmed to sludge, my resins bear down, forcing your feet, casting off your trespassed loiter over time. Through ancestral awakening and feathered progeny, Xochipilli haunts. Generations rise in altered smoke. Hummingbird warriors quicken in our mirrors, waking to ofrendas stained by limpias of fire, recuerdos dripping meso blood. And I wrote that one to the spirit of my great-grandfather, who rose again after having land stolen from him in an area of town now known as Westlake. It is this generational love and strength that I call on when I make conscious decisions to act in ways that defy the traumas and heartbreaks that have been handed down through time. When we carry generational trauma, we carry the decisions that our abuelas and abuelos made in moments of survival. These were often decisions guided by colonialism and assimilation, like I said earlier, the forced wearing of clothing that doesn't suit our souls. But hidden inside those painful moments of decision was a love for their children, for their people, the want to survive. Which brings me to now, and how the words and intentions of poetry can transcend time by dragging along all those things, those complexities of feelings that we can't always name, because the word love in itself is not enough. Or like when a parent makes a sacrifice to undo a cycle of pain and hurt. Which brings me to Exhibit G, what Mama gave. What is there to say when an outcome is the worst definition of someone seeing it all wrong, like a misinterpretation of love? In the brown paneled walls of a low-lit diner in your memory, where strawberry sauce tastes like a petrochemical plant, where who being is a fear, a silencing of what we might not deserve to have. And you can't put your finger on why, but it was a special place when you spent time there with her. And you ate the terrible things she ordered because you trusted, wanted to make her happy. Because her unhappiness was the worst outcome of all. And not what she wanted for you, but the sorrow she knew you'd learn from watching one-sided love she gave us as daily duty. What she didn't want you to see, the afraid she might be, the saids never meant, the ones that should have. She, choosing tongue-tied hollow over stuttering and slipping words into hurt. She took all of that and shaped and formed, fortifying from her own backbone with her soft, beautiful, and sometimes punishing hands into nothing significant that flipped her entire universe and yours. So you'd know you deserve to have someday the strawberries that don't taste like plastic. And that was a poem I wrote for my mama and all that she gave. And this brings us to Exhibit H. And the long list of evidence presented to you, trying to make my point and win my argument that the best love poem is the poem of despair. And finally, we're back in that space where certain dark things are to be loved in secret between the shadow and the soul, where creation transcends mere survival. It's where love bursts and shines in its own authenticity. Its prickly bleeds, its joyful ecstasies. When we allow ourselves to go into that space with real vulnerability, that's when we rise. So here is Exhibit H. Sangre traicionada. I'm sorry. I feel so bad. I'm sorry. It means, if you want to translate, okay, so it means betrayed blood. You're welcome. A whirring of machinery in her DNA, whispers and shouts, "Mija, you've got this." Climbing, rising on a bloodied stair toward clouded future, she ferries the weight of an ancient fortitude, of a now. Her footsteps spread flame and venom in a mist of rebirth and splitting of gashes by heart-wrenching onyx rose petals. It's a burning and hardening of flesh once vulnerable to regenerations of continents, hardy chorus and moonlit feast, given for blood of warriors lying buried in feathered armor, an insurrection unafraid, rising, climbing through backbone toward aspiration. She flies on wings of jade and gold, fortified by plasters of forgotten tongues and the blood of Quetzal mothers. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sticking with me.
Thank you. That was fantastic.
Aw, thanks.
And please note the various QR codes and URLs and whatnot. Get in touch with our poet friend.
Yeah,
So-
stay in touch, please.
Excellent. All right. So first question over here.
Thank you for enlightening this STEM-educated boomer's heart. Jacob, if you could go back to Sated, I think Exhibit E or whatever. That, stop. Yes, there. Okay. This is your award-winning poem.
Yes,
right?
yes. This is the one that bought me the good bottle of wine.
Yes, yes. I'll even buy you a glass. It's a good thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. A Malbec, I hear, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think they have that. Other than that, what I as a youth could never connect to poetry. Yet we have examples like Taylor Swift, who sings poems of despair.
Exactly.
And connects
Yes.
to billions of people.
Yes.
Right? Now, I look at that representation, and I look at your presentation of that representation, and they are worlds apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what you presented was living. What's on that screen is dead. Now, how can we fix that? Because if we all have to come to Nerd Night, it's a good thing. Okay. Poetry doesn't exist in some sense because it clearly is a living art form.
Yes.
But every time it's presented to people like me, it's presented in a dead form.
Oh, yeah.
Printed books.
Yeah.
Norton anthologies of poetry, right?
Right,
But
right.
a deader way doesn't exist. How do we solve this problem? Because
Okay.
you made this interesting.
I know exactly what you mean about death versus life here in terms of poetry. And so just know that poetry is intended to be read. It's intended to be read out loud. It's intended to be said and felt out loud, like in life, like you say. So it's kind of like, you know, like how Shakespeare is, right? You can read one of Shakespeare's plays or Shakespeare's sonnets or what have you, and it's never going to have the same meaning as it has when you actually hear it and see it being performed, right? When you experience it live, it's a totally different production. It's a totally different work altogether. And so poetry is the same way. And for those of you that aren't really into poetry, let me give you a hint, okay? So the breaks in the lines and the punctuation that we use is a cue for you and how to read it. So the reason why this poem is written in these very long lines is because this particular publication only wants 5-line poems. So I actually took a poem that could have been maybe 10, maybe even 12 if I really worked hard enough. And I had to condense it down into 5. And even though they're very long lines, for this particular publication, they were totally okay with that. Okay, so that's how you make a poem come alive. you read it out loud. Or have somebody read it to you. If it's a love poem, I mean, you know. But you're right about Taylor Swift. I was actually thinking about Taylor Swift when I was writing this, because she does write songs of despair in a major key, right? She totally does. But I come from the era of like The Cure, for example, who wrote really poppy, happy sounding on the surface songs that were actually totally full of despair, and in this really weird way sounded major key but were still minor key. Yeah, so that's kind of, you know, the music that we grew up with in the 80s. Anyone else?
That was an excellent question. Anybody got any others? Oh, see one over here.
Thank you very much for sharing your poetry, Kim.
You're welcome.
My favorite living poet is Anne Carson. Can you share some of your favorite living poets?
Oh, okay. So I'm really terrible with names. That's my problem. One of my favorite living poems is, and I really wish that I had her name, and now I'm gonna have to make sure I go on Instagram and post this. And I even thought for a second I should bring her book and share it with y'all, and I completely forgot to bring the book. But there's a really young poet who's actually from Texas. She's very young. I want to say by now, she's probably in her 20s by now. I think when I met her, she was still like 18 or 19. And she's a Black Latina who writes about the history of her family and her ancestors as she knows them as having been from Texas all along. Like, her ancestors had been in Texas even longer than mine have. Some of my ancestors have been in Texas since the late 1800s. Hers had been here even longer. And she writes about them in really beautiful ways. And so if you can, follow me on Instagram, I promise I will post her book. And I feel ashamed right now that I don't know her name. But she is definitely one of my favorite living poets. And another of my favorite living poets is Eduardo Viduare. He is a poet in South Texas, and he actually is one of the organizers of the Rio Grande Valley International Poetry Festival. Which is it's not a huge festival, but it's no small feat to pull that thing off once a year. It takes place down in McAllen every April. And so that is Edward. He's EDWARD VIDUARRE. And he is an incredible poet. And pretty much you can go and look at his Instagram. Any poet that he follows is pretty good. Like, amazing. And so right now, those are two of my favorite living poets. Yeah, you're welcome. Both from Texas, too. Anyone else? Yeah.
All right.
And I have to include songwriters, too. Shout out to our friend Chris Kyle, who is a songwriter. And, man, that dude, his songs are definitely the most beautiful poetry I've ever heard.
So after your presentation, you got me wondering or thinking about how I don't really notice a lot of poetry within music, especially after, like, say, 2010. It just doesn't really seem to be incorporated as much.
Uh-huh.
Do you see that continuing to be the new norm going into 2020, 2030, so on and so forth, compared to the past? That question is outside of my realm of experience, since I don't, since music is not my area. But I just mentioned a musician that's here in Austin. He was in a band called Shotzi back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I am nervous today, so I keep forgetting everything. Craig, what's the name of their latest? Startographers. Yeah, the Startographers. So Chris writes all their songs. Go check out Startographers. Look at their music. But what you're going to find, though, is that their music is very reminiscent of the music we were listening to probably in the late 90s, like I said, early 2000s. So it's kind of like that old school, like, these musicians are like, they're reaching 50
pushing 55, and they're still writing that way. And they're not the only band that's doing that. There's also a band in town called Magnet School. Same thing. It's people, you know, like I said, in their 40s, 50s, maybe even a couple of them pushing, 55. I'm not going to say 60 in case they see this. But they, like Magnet School, for example, they also write poetry into their songs and also rock, like, very loudly. They're one of the loudest bands I've ever heard, probably next to Motorhead. So, anyone else? All right. Okay, well, thank you for indulging a poet. And yeah, if you need help fixing your shit, I'm your girl.
Thank you, Kim. That was fantastic.